Hey, this is Alex with Grow How, and today we're going to talk about one of my least favorite subjects, and that's turf grass. Let's face it, there's a lot of folks out there who are not looking for the best lawn in the world. They're just looking for something decent to go in front of their house and to not be ashamed of for their neighbors. It doesn't need to be top of the line. This is not a discussion. I repeat, this is not a discussion for the best turf grass on the block. This is a discussion of keeping your turf grass healthy and relatively productive without killing yourself. The first thing I want to cover is mowing. Mowing is a weekly ritual if you have turf grass, and it really should be a weekly ritual if you're going to have turf grass. For it to be healthy and strong, you need to mow it. However, you don't need to mow it excessively. You don't need to mow it every day. You don't need to mow it down to, the putting green standard. In fact, that's not very good for turf grass. If you want good turf grass that's good, strong, and healthy, you're looking at mowing it at a height of about 3 inches or higher. At work, I have my grass set at 4¼ inches. That's as high as my smallest mower will go. I'd like to do it higher, but then that means I can't use that mower. 3 inches minimum. Now that's going to provide you with some good features. One is you're going to have a lot of energy production from your leaves because you've got longer leaves. Grass is really just leaves. That higher energy production will cut down on the amount of water you need. That will also drive your roots deeper because they have the energy to go deeper. Number two, you want to cut no more than 1/3 of your grass off each mowing. Now this can get hard if you're putting a lot of fertilizer and a lot of water on there. You may have to do it twice a week. Preferably, keep your fertilizer down and keep your water down. We'll discuss that later. And you should be able to do that easily once a week. Number 3 in mowing is mulch mow. Mulch mowing cuts the top off the grass, grinds it to a finer particle, and lays it down. Now, if you're old like me, we're not talking about running your mower without a bag and leaving windrows and not raking it up. No, the current mulch mowers are going to cut that grass into smaller pieces. You're not going to notice it much. And grinding those up will put more of the nitrogen that you fertilize the lawn with back into the lawn. Plus, it'll add carbon. The carbon will help hold on to water and nutrients until the plant can use it. Mulch mowing is really upping your game in lawn care with very little expense. Mulch mowers, they're not bottom tier mowers, but certainly you can get some decent mid-tier mowers that are fairly cheap that'll mulch mow. It will make your grass better. After a couple of years of that, your soil will be really quite a lot better. The next issue is watering. If you live in an area where there's a lot of rain, you're going to take whatever water you can get. I live in the West. We have bluegrass and some fescue as our predominant grasses here. They're going to need more water than what nature can provide. When you're looking at watering, you're looking at deep and infrequent. If you frequently water, the roots will start just being on the top layer of soil, and when a drought hits, they've got nothing to drag that water that's deeper in the ground up with if they don't have the deeper roots. By infrequent watering, you are driving those roots deeper, and this will give you more stress resistance in your lawn and more ability to deal with if the sprinklers get left off, if something happens, if one breaks. You're not going to lose as much lawn. The next issue with irrigation is getting at least 1/2 inch of irrigation. That's going to put your water in the range of 4 to 5 inches down, which is okay. I prefer a little bit more per irrigation event, but you need at least that 1/2 inch. If you're irrigating more frequently than once a week, you're probably going to be okay. The third thing I'm going to go into here is depth you want your roots. Really, you want roots that can go 6 to 8 inches deep. 6 inches is fairly easy with a turf grass, bluegrass, which has relatively shallow roots. 6 inches isn't that deep. If you get those deep roots, again, you're going to get more resistance to stress, more resistance to weeds. It's just going to be healthier. Most of our watering is so frequent that we don't get those deep roots. Again, that goes back to the infrequent watering. And then you need to really look at watering deep enough to get some good deep roots. The next issue is fertilization. Fertilization is kind of important to lawns. All that leafy material needs a lot of nitrogen. If you don't get that nitrogen to it, you're going to have a yellowish lawn. You're going to have it not necessarily outcompete weeds, and it's not going to be able to create as much energy to drive your roots. So fertilization is key. And how much fertilizer do you add? Most fertilization programs, I know 4 steps, 5 steps, whatever step it is, are really popular out there. Most of those are pushing 5 pounds to 6 pounds per every 1,000 square feet per season. 5 is really the maximum that a homeowner is going to look at. 5 pounds is enough for a heavily worn out lawn to restore it. Now, if you're on sports turf, that's a different matter. But for your homeowner, you're really not going to be able to get better results from more than 5 pounds per 1,000 square feet. A lawn that receives very little walking, very little traffic stress is only going to need about 2 pounds per 1,000 square foot. When I was doing just straight lawn fertilization professional, I could get most of my lawns that were not highly trafficked or in sand to do very well 2 pounds per 1,000 feet per year. So keep that in mind. That 2 pounds is really a good goal. If you go to 5 pounds, if you have a lot of traffic, if you have a lot of parties, if you have a lot of kids running around, may be a better option, but you're going to have to adjust that according to what your needs are. Next is aeration. The soil gets compacted, roots tend to get a little bit knotty at times, a little bit matted. By having an aeration once or twice a year, preferably in spring or in fall, you'll take a lot of that stress off your lawn. You'll make small holes in there. You'll rotate some of that material around by plug aerating and pulling those plugs out. And that really helps your root growth and strengthens that. I've never found a plug aeration that goes as deep as I want it to because I want it to go that full 6 inches of rooting. Core aerators can't do that, but as deep as you can get, at least once a year in the spring will be good. If you need more, if you have more compaction, if you have more kids playing on the lawn, a fall aeration is also beneficial. This next one is always going to be controversial: weed control. I'm the type of guy that I love having clover in my lawns. Clover has about the same need for water that turf grass has. It has beneficial effects for lawn. It does bring in nitrogen, which is one of our major costs and problems in fertilization. It's 2002. Fertilizer is expensive. I don't consider clover a lawn weed. Other people do. I know the history of clover in lawns, and it used to be in lawn mixes before World War II and even up into the 50s or 60s. Clover's good for lawns. You may not like it. I get it. Then you're going to treat it as a weed, and I'm actually okay with that. With most of these weeds that are broadleaf, I prefer going in and spot spraying them. And I'll get into some more of that later on, but when I spot spray, I keep my chemicals where I want them, killing the plants that I want them to, instead of spreading them all over the place and hoping they do their job. Spot spraying is preferable. When you spot spray, usually you're going to be doing it with a broadleaf spray. A lot of those are not supposed to be used at over 85 degrees or have 85 degrees for the next 3 days. Please check your label and plan ahead accordingly. It can be a pain because if you don't get them quite early enough, I know in Utah we were cold and then we went hot really quick this year. So be aware and have a plan and follow the label to, it's literally the label is the law. So follow it to the letter of the label, follow it to the letter of the law, and actually it'll be quite safe. The other issue is pre-emergent. These are usually added in the spring and they kill weeds as they root down. That means they sprout, they send either a root or they send their beginning emergent leaves depending on which pre-emergent you use, and it'll kill them before you ever see them just as they're germinating. This is a preferable way to do it because it takes a lower chemical load to do it. So it's going to be safer for you. Hey, will it get all the weeds? No. I should also note both a broadleaf treatment and the pre-emergent can be gotten with fertilizers. That's, the 4-step program. I don't like those because you usually dose up more fertilizer than I want at that time of the year. Those 2 treatments alone will hit you above your 2 pounds, closer to 4 pounds. I don't want that on my lawns. If you have a high need turf grass, maybe, but that's still an awfully lot for the first part of the season. Second of all, the dry forms of these, the granular forms of these, are considered by a lot of people to be less effective than a wet form. So your spot spraying is going to be more effective, and if you can apply your pre-emergent with a spray, generally you'll have better results. Although Homeowner formulations may not be available in your area for that. Please check. When you go to your store, ask a lot of questions. If they can't answer your questions, you might want to rethink whether you want to use that product. Another thing that I should have brought up on fertilizer is the frequency of fertilization. Depending on the product you use, that's going to depend on how you want to do it. So when you're using a product that is like one of those 4-step programs, in some ways it's good because you're spreading your fertilization out through the season. That allows your plant to access things as it needs it through the season, as long as you don't overdo it. My preference is lower on the beginning of the season than most of these packages recommend, but that's going to depend on what kind of fertilizer you do. If you use something like urea that is very high nitrogen, it only lasts in the soil about 2 weeks. It's almost instantaneous on your effect. You can go out a couple days later and it'll just be a lush green lawn, but in 2 weeks you're not going to have any nitrogen left. If you have a coated urea, that will slowly release that urea, and you don't need to fertilize as frequently to keep up the green on the lawn. It also means you're not going to have just 2 weeks later this just brilliant green emerald lawn. It's going to take a while. The other issue I have is late season fertilization. If you go and fertilize late in the summer, September, October, when the grass is still green, the grass is going to store that for next season. You've probably seen the guy on the block who has the greenest lawn first up in the season. That can either be done by early fertilization or the fact that you fertilized late and allowed your turf a couple of weeks to pick up all that fertilizer and store it. Those are some things to think about. Nitrogen. The other two nutrients you're going to need a lot of are potassium and phosphorus. You will need to look at a soil test to get those to the appropriate levels. That's something I can't predict. Nitrogen, it's a little bit easier to say you'll need this. Those two, you really need to get your soil tested, and they do stay in the soil more long term. That's something to think about. There's been a lot of talk recently online about dethatching, and this used to be an issue back in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s that we really stressed about, is there's too much thatch in the lawns. Thatch is stems that have gotten too thick or died in the lawn. Reality is, if you're growing fescue, if you're growing bluegrass, even Bermuda grass, when I maintained Bermuda grass lawns, I never had a thatch issue. Zoysia grass, I never had a thatch issue. The only lawn I think I've had that had a thatch issue was centipede grass. It's one we don't grow in Utah very often. Most lawns are not going to have a real thatch issue. If they do have a thatch issue, your best defense against that is going back to that aeration. If you do a yearly aeration, you're not very likely to build up thatch. If you don't do a yearly aeration, you're still not very likely to build up thatch to the point where you need to treat it with like a dethatcher or vertical raking. This has become really popular with homeowners, especially with like relatively cheap homeowner dethatching or vertical raking machines. People love them, and when I ask, well, what's it good for, they give me a list of things that most lawns don't have. Yes, you may need to do that at some point, but it's not common, and it's certainly not standard lawn care according to all the experts that I feel I can say know what they're talking about. I talked a little bit about clover on the lawn. I'm not one of those people who feels that everything has to be a weed. Lawn is what we call monoculture. We have one thing planted there, it does one thing only, and that's how most people like it. I'm the exception. I like having clover on my lawns. I like having yarrow on my lawn. I like having a few violets on my lawn. I say a few because if I have a lot of violets, that's an indication that I'm overwatering. I'll cut down. I don't mind them being there, I just don't want to overwater. And I like that. To me, that's a more rich, that's a more lush landscape. That is something that I find more interesting. Don't be afraid of the weeds. If you don't want them, I'm not going to get on your case for getting rid of them. I'm not that person. Consider the option that maybe that might be a better option for you, is to not have pure turf grass, but to have a mixture of things that you enjoy and bring different textures and different looks into your life. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you have any questions, please hit me in the YouTube comments below. If you'd like me to cover any more of these issues in greater depth, let me know. This is just a beginning primer. This is what you need to do. It does not answer all the questions. Let me know and I will address them later on. Catch y'all later. Manana.